This video contains spoilers for Final Fantasy XIV up to and including the contents of patch 6.5 Growing Light. My opinions are my own, and while I strive to be informative, this is meant to be a tongue-in-cheek chat, not an in-depth research project. This is also the video where I learned that I cannot pronounce a single one of these characters' names properly. On a good day, I'm lucky if I can pronounce my own Warrior of Light's name properly, so please forgive me for any mispronunciations. Finally, a reminder that this is a critical channel. If you expect a song of praise, then I'd recommend looking elsewhere. In the aftermath of the final days of Final Fantasy XIV's Endwalker, the journey from patch 6.1 to 6.5, which I have dubbed the Zero arc, had some rather large shoes to fill, presenting the first plot since the wrap-up of the 10-year Hydaelyn Zodiark saga. This video aims to delve into the narrative construction of the Zero arc, scrutinizing its merits, inconsistencies, and the portrayal of Zero as a character. Lastly, we'll strive to ask, where do we go from here? I'll temper expectations by saying that I have many criticisms of the Zero arc that I hope to explore, but before we dive into that, I'll briefly cover what I thought the creative team did well. First, Soken & Company's musical talent continues to shine through in the score. For the MSQ, the tracks that stood out the most for me were rearrangements of Final Fantasy IV classics. I love the use of the harpsichord for Troy and Beauty, and Zeromus' theme, which was described to me as a disco rave, was pure fun. But I think the MSQ standout was the somber piano rendition of Sorrow and Loss that played in Zero's domain and that can be heard throughout this video. A few of the dungeons had very inspired designs. The Felquid of Troya was my favorite, but I love void aesthetic and dilapidated castles, so this one felt like it was made for me. The Lunar Subterrane was a great finale to the arc, which took us back to the fall of Baron via memory. And just to get this out of the way, Zero's aesthetic is excellent. Her voice actress, at least in the English version, does a good job with what she's given, and her overall look, hat tipping aside, is great. To be fair, it is hard to mess up Vampire Hunter D, but as a Final Fantasy character. I also want to touch briefly on the prop points I liked before getting further into specifics. The Contra Memoria was easily the most interesting thing about the entirety of the Zero arc, and every time it was mentioned, I wished we were dealing with that instead of, well, whatever the heck we were doing with Zero. The idea of Golbez possibly being a shard of Azim, and Durant easily fitting in as a shard of Xenos was right up my alley, regardless of other issues with the Durant and Golbez plot. I also liked the allusions to Dante's Inferno, with the Void being a cursed purgatory where death was a sought-after release, and consuming a Void scent meant taking on their nature. Too bad none of that really came into play nearly enough to make it interesting beyond window dressing or a tool to get from point A to, well, nowhere at all. And with what praise I had out of the way, let's move on. Zero character, a deconstruction of the aloof ally. If I'm going to refer to this as the Zero arc, I think it's best that I address the DeviantArt character in the room. Zero, originally introduced in Endwalker as Xenos' Reaper avatar, formally joined the Warrior of Light along in their quest as of patch 6.2, Buried Memories, accompanying the former Scions and Varshan on their quest through the Void to save Azdaia and prevent Golbez's schemes. Zero graded against just about everything I considered to be good characterization, writing, and development. By the end of 6.3, every tip of her hat was a pain, and I found myself wishing to spend time anywhere away from her. The only good that can be said of her, besides her physical design, is that she doesn't seem to be joining the Scions for 7.0, and looks to be relegated to the same position as Reen on the first, and I'd take Reen with me over Zero any day. Zero is the very embodiment of a Mary Sue in a game that already had one as its main playable character. But instead of just brushing her off as some edgelady or a Mary Sue, I'll explain what the use of these labels mean by citing specific issues regarding Zero's characterization. Zero draws from many of the same tropes I'd expect of a 14-year-old writing their first self-insert fanfiction, coming off as a type of idolized and unrealistic form of wish fulfillment. First, we need to examine the nature of Zero's birth. It is said that in patch 6.2, Zero was born during the Contra Memoria before the Flood of Darkness. Somehow her mother came in contact with the darkness, resulting in a half-void sent child, however that works. During the flood of darkness, he was somehow again transported to the rift for an unknown period of time, probably millennia, before returning to the void, the only one retaining a human form. This leads to a classic case of the hybrid power trope, where the character demonstrates all the benefits of both races, in this case voidsent and mortal, with the downsides of neither. To wit, Zero is able to live an extraordinarily long period of time without aging past adulthood in the void, and without taking on a corrupt appearance. Neither does she succumb to the aether craze of her voidsent brethren. She also states that she is able to forego taking on the qualities of that which she consumes through meditation or something. She can consume aether from other voidsent or from other sources as a voidsent would, but is also capable of human bodily functions to sustain herself, namely eating, because we wouldn't be able to have 3 bonding over the simple joys of food scenes otherwise. Zero can leave her body and travel to the first, along with the Warrior of Light, with no specific preparation due to her time spent in the rift and her nature as a voidsent. She can apparently just cast off her body like Xenos or the Asians did, I don't know. Her physical prowess is similar or equal to Estinian and the Warrior of Light, and she can take out enemies in a single swing. You would assume being filled with the darkness would leave Zero susceptible to the light, but no. With a bit of help from Reen, she can imbibe the light of the empty, just as the Warrior of Light did with the Light Wardens. Zero also has an extraordinarily diverse skill set, able to perform feats as the plot demands. She's the only remaining Memoriate, able to turn voidsent into memory crystals resembling Auracite, a power that few of the denizens of the 13th had even before the Flood, and that even Silva didn't retain after coming to the First, though I suspect this was because the concept didn't exist yet. Despite her utter inability to understand simple concepts like friend or food, she is fully capable of, for example, parleying with a bunch of Garleans in a highly political fashion over why the party should be allowed to utilize the Tower of Babel. In a scene where the Scions have already failed at this parlance, she is able to use her experience in the Transactional Society of the Void to enlighten Varshan to the Garleans' desire for self-sustainment via independent trade. As a reminder, Varshan, and therefore Vitra, is a millennia-old dragon who has held the position of shadow leadership in a trade nation of Thavnir for hundreds of years and should have easily reached this conclusion on his own. But the infantilizing or woobification of what should be strong characters in this series is a departure from my criticisms of the Zero arc, and perhaps the topic of a whole other video. Let me know in the comments if this is something you'd like to see explored. Here, it needs to be mentioned what this entire arc is really about. Teaching Zero, and I am not kidding, the power of friendship, and that being around others and acting a hero is much better than looking after yourself alone. To get to this end, Zero must be shown the joys of life with friends, food, companionship, and having someone to believe in you. And for all of this to occur in the time between 6.2 and 6.5, what needs to happen is what I call a character arc speedrun. It is required, therefore, that minimal conflict between characters arises, and that which does is put down immediately. For this reason, Zero is trusted to near reverence by any character that encounters her. Characters like Estinian, Vershan, and Y'shtola show no particular reason to be wary at her for more than mere moments, despite her being a voidsent, and even with the knowledge that she was once Xenos' avatar, Xenos. In fact, the simple expression of distaste for the former Garlean prince is enough to even have characters like Euless and Alisaie trusting her enough to deliver heartfelt dialogues and entrust the warrior's well-being to her. Any potential off-putting or offensive behavior befitting a voidsent's transactional nature is seen as nothing more than a silly eccentricity to be gently corrected, if corrected at all. This is up to and including a moment in 6.3 after the dungeon, where the party reclaims Azdaya's forcibly removed eye and is told that Golbez is complicit in her fate. Vitra is understandably upset, to which Zero callously remarks, "Why does he look so defeated? We are closer to finding his sister, are we not?" Instead of lashing out at Zero or telling her that now isn't the time for a lesson in humanity, Estinian chastises Vershan for being overly emotional, "Calm yourself," he says. "I appreciate that you're upset, but such passion clouds your judgment, and you must endeavor to remain composed." The issue is that the scene lands as cruel. If you want an example on how a scene and a character like this could be portrayed at the hands of a competent writer, I'd suggest looking at either Anya or Illyria's arc in Buffy the Vampire Slayer or in Angel, respectively. But moving on. It's also crucial that we mention the issue of pacing. While Zero is originally described as an aloof misanthrope, molded by the transactional society she was a part of for an immeasurable amount of time, it takes only the course of about one full patch, namely the later third of 6.2 and most of 6.3, to bring her around to the idea that maybe friendship good, depending on others not so bad. Watching this point be driven home literally by a duty in 6.3 where, get this, Zero just can't sync all four of the meteor mechanics at once is either insulting or hilarious. I'm honestly not quite sure which. This comes to a peak in the same patch where, with a customary tip of the hat, she decides to try out her new self-righteous life view on Rubicon. Upon Mount Ordeals, which I guess is supposed to be representative of Cecil's change from Dark Knight to Paladin, though why would you remind me of a better written game in this patch, Xenos exclaims that it's wrong to damn another to save yourself. Not everything need be a trade, causing Rubicon to exposit the entirety of Golbez's plan. Because of course. And it doesn't end there. By the time 6.5 rolls around, Zero is a full Talk No Jutsu master. She's able to push Golbez into a full redemption arc even after he attempted to flood the source with the souls of all Voidsent through the summoning of Zeromus through using Azhdaya, simply by convincing him through words that she's now learned the art of friendship and is ready to take him by the hand and begin fixing the void with him. Oh boy. Zero cohesion. While it seems like the majority of my criticisms are on Zero as a character, I assure you that she is so instrumental to every other aspect of this plot arc that it would be nearly impossible for me to discuss any other issues without first getting all of that out of the way. When taking the whole of 6.1 to 6.4 into account, each and every plot element seemed to exist in some sort of weird filler bubble connected not really to anything that came before or anything to come beyond the obvious stingers in 6.5. Somehow, the arc felt rushed and slow and disjointed simultaneously, with the party quote-unquote rubber banding between the source and the void. In 6.1, the party spends its time trying to find a way to the void, but just before they can step through, we have to wait another 4 months before they can actually have the alchemist or Cid come up with a way for them to be safe. In 6.2, the Scions come back to the source with little by way of leads for finding Azhdaya and a weakened Zero, so we have to wait for 4 months before a plan can be devised. In 6.3, the party is about to set foot into the void again, but Vitra senses his sister's presence to the north, and they instead waste time eating boots to learn friendship and falling into Golbez's obvious trap by flouncing around Garlemald dealing with an influx of Voidsent. In the land of the Reapers, never. Meanwhile, Rubicon goes to close the Void Gate in Thavnir in order to buy Golbez more time. This puts everything right back to where they were in 6.1, looking for a way into the void. 6.4 and 6.5 had some of the oddest plot choices I've ever seen, in that for 2 patches in a row, the Warrior of Light, while continuing to show Zero the joys of being a hero that act out on behest of others with no promised reward, has to convince the denizens of the Source and the First to allow them to use the power of a tower in order to progress the plot. I only mention this because it's odd that it happens twice, once to channel ether into Zodiark's pit to get back to the void, and a second time to channel light from the First into the void to pierce Zeromus' shield. Speaking of towers and channeling light, this arc is overly dependent on MacGuffins acting as Deus Ex Machina whenever the writers can't figure out another way to move the plot. In order to turn Zero from her super cool Xenos avatar that we'll never see again into a Vampire Hunter D clone, the Warrior of Light uses Heidelin's median tracking crystal. How? No idea. How does the party survive extended stints into the void? Cid and the Alchemist's superpowered warding skills. How do they open up a new path to the void in 6.4? Babel. How do they channel light from the First to the void? Cid's balls. Yup, you heard me. Cid's balls. Spherical devices that turn into channeling tripods that can direct the stream of ether. Don't ask me, I don't know either. But the important thing to note is that the plot needed it, so it exists. Zero originality, zero-sum gain. Plot points and dialogue only seem to exist to get us from one point to the next, not to build any sort of real development or lore that would have any lasting impact in the wider world. In the end, there were no stakes, no sacrifices, nothing lost, and pretty much nothing gained. Vitra gives his simulacrum and an eye, but not his life, to Azdaia, and got back his sister in the form of a tiny Midgard-Soma reskin. But that doesn't really matter because his simulacrum is just going to be rebuilt anyway. In the 13th, Zero and Golbez would be resigned to that shard. Nothing has changed, and they'll never be seen again, except for when the developers need an idea for a trial series, an exploratory zone, or, God forbid, the actual MSQ. The Void itself remains the same desolate patch of ether-starved land populated by Voidsent who cannot die, and minimal breakthroughs were made in traveling from one shard to another. Y'shtola is back at her research, Estinian is still lounging around Razadhan, leaving us right back to where we started in 6.1. Again. If this happened in a way that was unique or interesting, that would be one thing. But the execution played out like a Trials quest, updated and voiced for MSQ, for lack of any better ideas from the junior writers. Let's take the other Trials plots into consideration, namely those of Heavensward and of Shadowbringers, which drew directly off of monsters from other games, the Warring Triad from Final Fantasy VI and the weapons of Final Fantasy VII, respectively. Even these were done in a way where we knew what we would be fighting, but the rest of the plot remained a mystery. Now, the MSQ trials and fights always remained a mystery. In 6.x, we knew exactly what we would be fighting. At some point, we battled the 4 Archfiends, then Golbez and the Shadow Dragon, then Zeromus. I mean, the developers didn't even bother keeping it a secret during the live letters. And if that weren't enough, even the plot points, Zero following Cecil's path from Dark Knight to Paladin, Golbez's redemption arc, to name a few, were beat by beat the path of Final Fantasy IV. This was less a love letter and more copying word from word the homework of a much smarter classmate, despite them asking you to change it and not make it too obvious. So, we're at 6.5. The world is safe from existential threat again, and we're ready to start a new adventure. Again, this time in Dawntrail. Yet I have to ask, what was the point? Well, maybe the point was the lessons we learned along the way. Did the Warrior of Light learn anything, or undergo any sort of astute character development? Zero purpose. Sadly, no. Beyond being Zero's personal mode of transport between the Source and the First, it didn't really seem to matter whether the Warrior of Light was there or not. This arc was always meant to have Zero as the true main character. The warrior relegated to window dressing, sometimes in especially hilarious ways, such as the scene in 6.5 where the Scions and Zero fight Zeromus while you stand there, menacingly. Bonus to any book-wielding Warriors of Light, I guess. And I think even beyond all the problems I have with Zero, even beyond the contrived plot, not being the major focal point, catalyst, mover, or shaker in a story where you always were before, and in a story where you're forced to pretty much play a silent protagonist, is what made it truly unsatisfying. In A Realm Reborn, the Warrior of Light may not have been the most important character. Minfilia guided the warrior, and Alphino was the true visionary, as flawed as that was. But they had the blessing. They had the echo, and they were chosen by Hydaelyn. By virtue of that, it was them who ultimately had to be the one to take on the Ultima Weapon and La Habrea. The Warrior of Light had to save Minfilia and kill Nabrialis, had to escape the bloody banquet and live with the guilt of leaving their fellow Scions behind. In Heavensward, the warrior is isolated from their friends, who they believe to be dead, or worse, and had the blessing forcibly removed by Midgard-Soma. The story is about the warrior coming to terms with that fact while dealing with the city-state of Ishgard's conflict. They are dragged into the Dragonsong War through the context of regaining their blessing, and go on a quest of discovery with a close-knit cast of characters, Alphino, Estinian, and Ysael, and a great supporting cast like Americ, Horschfant, or Edmund, and others. By the end of that patch cycle, the Warrior of Light has regained their blessing and has found their friends. They save Astidian from Nidhogg's rage and learn something important about the nature of the multiverse. In return, they lose friends dear to them forever: Shale, Minfilia, Horsefont, and Papalymo. Probably the last time the plot was ever bold enough for this. In Stormblood, we take on a war that the champion of Eorzea has the option to outright admit is not theirs, telling Alphinaud, "This is not our fight." To make up for this, a larger-than-life primal force in the shape of a very, very good-looking Legatus comes along and forces it to be personal. He deems the warrior his personal enemy and later friend, and makes the war itself an intimate battle between them. If you play an altruistic warrior, then you want to help your comrades and the city-states gain liberation. If you choose the more battle-focused options, then you want to best Xenos because only you can. In post-patch Stormblood, in the course of dealing with the fallout of liberating Alamigo and Doma from Garlemald, the Scions begin to fall unconscious one by one, and the warrior has no idea why. Worse yet, rumors of Xenos, very much alive, plotting and scheming in the Providences, run abound, and eventually we'll have to deal with that. Ascian involvement is all but certain, and with the Light's blessing and Hydaelyn's call, absent as it is, it has to be the warrior to face it. And then they are pulled to the first by G'raha. In Shadowbringers up to 5.3, the Warrior of Light, now Darkness, is the fabled hero of a dying world. Only they, with the help of the Oracle of Light, have the strength and power to absorb the light of the Wardens and bring darkness back to the world. Couple this with the learning of the true nature of Hydaelyn and Zodiark, the rejoinings, or 80% of the world's mysteries as Yoshi P once put it, and their nature as Azem, a sort of reincarnated chosen one, it becomes very clear that the story is all about them, meaning you. You are the central character. This leads to Endwalker, where the larger-than-life primal force in Xenos has retaken his body and is recreating the final days with the help of a local clown. And he's doing this just to vie for the warrior's attention. The warrior is the sole reason that this is happening, whether they like it or not. And by going back to Elpis, they all but solidify their position as Azem, the single person aware of what is truly at stake, and Vinaz's chosen. Now, your mileage may vary. They are the only ones capable of defeating the source of the final days. And then 6.1 to 6.5 throws that all away, and the warrior fades into the background like some Dungeons & Dragons high-level pure fighter with no skill points besides punch fist into open hand, occasionally giving a silent nod to the idea that friendship and people knowing you to be a generally helpful person is a good thing. Even your role of showing this to Zero could be, and was, better handled by Euless, Reen, Alisei, Thancred, and even Astinian. Why is the Warrior of Light even there? And why did it have to be them? If the Warrior of Light was airlifted from 6.1 to 6.5, what would that have changed? The Zero arc has certainly been a wild year and a half. If by wild you mean a hat tip to Final Fantasy IV that was more like borrowing the hat, wearing it for a while, and then reluctantly giving it back worn out from all the tipping. A narrative pit stop, as it were. And these are just the issues I had with the arc that would be considered the most accessible. If I had to delve into it further, I'm absolutely livid that these devs just can't get Xenos' name and face out of their mouth. Seriously, what was that 6.4 scene? And yet, they outright give the arc I wanted for him to some random shard. So, can I have my minion now? No, of course not. But I digress. In the 10-year history of Final Fantasy XIV's narrative, this may just be a blotch that we all chuckle about after we've played through Dawn Trail. But with the current trajectory of the creative business unit's writing, I really wouldn't hold my breath. We at Echoes of Aetheris sincerely hope that you've enjoyed this in-depth analysis